We all remember our elementary and middle school years. It was a great time of innocence. In addition to valuable lessons we learned at the behest of our states, many of us, especially those of us who were the oldest in our clans, also looked forward to the lessons and especially the new forbidden words that our friends with older siblings had learned over the weekend or over the summer. While we were careful to always restrict such language to the company of the peers that had taught it to us, sometimes a teacher would walk up at an inadvertent time, or in our youth we would get careless. And when we did, we faced the consequences prescribed by our education system. There were never any legal consequences, even though some of us would have preferred that to facing our parents, but a bill under consideration in the Massachusetts State House would change that. On Tuesday, lawmakers in the Bay State considered a bill to add criminal penalties for using the word bitch. A bill that would definitely complicate a Meredith Brooks concert in the Commonwealth. The bill is said to impose pretty stiff penalties for the use of the word. Up to $150 worth of fine for the first offense and $200 for each additional offense. But additional offenses may also result in 6 months of imprisonment. Having lived in the greater Boston area for 2 years, the first thought that I had was that curbing the use of that word is going to be easier said than done in that society. But Massachusetts Republicans voiced very different concerns, of course. Do you believe free speech matters? Tired of @Mass Dems dictating what you can say? Judiciary Committee will be taking this up tomorrow at 1 p.m. Come on down to the State House, rooms A1 and A2, first floor. Let 'em have it. Now, the social media hype surrounding the bill does make it seem like we are back to our school days, and every single utterance of the word results in a punitive action. But that's not actually the case, at least not on paper. A person who uses the word bitch directed at another person to accost, annoy, degrade, or demean the other person shall be considered to be a disorderly person in violation of this section, and shall be subject to the penalties provided in subsections A and B. A violation of this subsection may be reported by the person to whom the offensive language was directed at, or by any witness to such incident. In the purest of legal aspects, the bill is clear that malice is a requirement to enforce, but the problem with bans on language is that it is subjective. That is, what is friendly banter to one person is malicious harassment to another, and the bill does include language to provide punitive action based on the testimony of a witness rather than a complaining victim. Interestingly enough, the Bay State's ban on the B word isn't the only story we can see that has clear free speech consequences. If we remember, just a month ago, we saw a story out of New York City where it became illegal to call someone an illegal immigrant. There was no new legislation, rather the city updated legal guidelines to several pieces of existing legislation. I have linked a PDF in the description, and the law mostly pertains to housing and services, but I do want to focus on this line. Alien, used in many laws to refer to a non-citizen person, is a term that may carry negative connotations and dehumanize immigrants, marking them as other. As discussed in Section 3, the use of certain language, including illegal alien and illegals, with the intent to demean, humiliate, or offend a person or persons constitutes discrimination under the New York CHRL. While we could go on an extensive discussion as to whether or not legal and illegal aliens are the same thing, let's focus on the laws at hand because this law carries a fine of $250,000 per incident if the offending word is used, but it seems to only apply to employing companies and landlords. Most documentation I found is very vague on what happens with individuals, but in the same PDF I did find a passage that shows us that New York City intends to make it hurt in one way or another if a private individual does offend this law. Employers may be held liable for a non-managerial employee's harassment if the employer knew about the employee's conduct and acquiesced in such conduct or failed to take immediate and appropriate corrective action, or should have known about the employee's discriminatory conduct and failed to exercise reasonable diligence to prevent such discriminatory conduct. While it seems that the law isn't going after an individual's right to free speech, much like in Kamala and Trump's Twitter account, the lawmakers in New York City are counting on corporations to do the dirty work for them. Now, I'm known as kind of a free speech absolutist, but I do tend to rail against hate speech laws, and I don't do it because I want to see hatred flowing. In fact, it could be exactly the opposite. I actually temper my language, and I'm one of the first people to try and convince others to temper theirs. I rail against these laws because I don't want to see the government or a judge being the one to decide what is hate speech and what is not. People are people and they are subjective, and these examples we can see what can happen to people when a failure in judgment is used against them. And even now, the language argument is far from over, and its subjectiveness is in full display as we look into the latest controversy surrounding the president's Twitter. This tweet erupted in an accusation of marginalizing the experiences of black lynching victims. Let's have a look. So someday, if a Democrat becomes president and the Republicans win the House even by a tiny margin, they can impeach the president without due process or fairness or any legal rights. All Republicans must remember what we are witnessing here, a lynching, but we will win. Look, lynching is one of the worst things that human beings can do to one another. It's essentially going out to hang somebody without any sort of a trial because of some sort of political ideology or wrongdoing by the person, but we do all enjoy due process. And it has been a crime against all races throughout history. And the word has been okay to say in media and in general discourse up until about a week ago. And I want you to keep in mind the fact that those who would attribute it suddenly to racism are the same people that want to judge your ability to say bitch or illegal alien. Freedom of speech is absolute. Enforcement of speech depends on the objectiveness of man and can never be completely absolute. What do you think about Massachusetts' new language bill, and what do you think about the adjustment to legislation in New York City? I always welcome a thoughtful and positive discussion in the comment section below, and especially over on Twitter. That is at EdsBlog Twitter with a 1 in place of the I. Thanks as always for listening to this show and supporting this channel. And remember, never take the words of bloggers, podcasters, or journalists as gospel. Find all the facts and draw your own conclusions. Take care.
You're always there for me.